So about 4 or 5 years ago, I was walking through the shop where I work, and back in an area I'm not normally at very often, I happened to find a Pioneer SA-500, which is actually sitting over there. You can barely see the corner of it, covered in dirt, playing at full volume. I started asking around as to who had it, and it was a coworker, and basically asked him if he wanted to get rid of it, why he had it there. It's, it's not something to just be in a shop covered in dirt and dust, and basically he didn't care about it at all. So I swapped him out for a RCA STA-500, which is basically like it was like an RCA. How was it written on the back of it? Made by Pioneer for Radio Shack and badged RCA. But anyways, it was loud, so he liked it. So I got it, and a year or so later, he stopped me on the way to lunch. He said, "Hey, I got this other big stereo." But anyways, he says, "Hey, I got this other big stereo in my shed, and it isn't working right anymore. You can have it too if you want it." I was like, "All right, well, whatever. Bring it in. I'll take a look at it." And I'm picturing some sound design or a Yorks or some sort of garbage. Well, he shows up with this, covered in dirt, dust, and bird droppings. It's a Pioneer SX5570, which happens to be the black-faced version of the Pioneer SX950. So pretty good stereo. And at the time, I really not a sort of an audiophile. I'm starting to do some repair work on some of this stuff because it's kind of interesting. But I don't pay attention to any of this, so I had no idea what this thing was. I just knew it was big and heavy. So I started doing some research, and I'm like, holy crap, this thing could possibly be worth a lot of money. So I went back to the shop after I got it. I said, "Hey, you may want to think twice about just giving this to me. You may be able to list this on eBay and sell it for some good money." I've seen some of these, looking through the archive, some of these have sold for $2,000. Well, he wasn't interested. He didn't care. It was just old junk, and it didn't work anyways. So, all right, I did my due diligence. I didn't just take it from the guy and not say anything. So at least I was honest about it. So brought it home. First thing I did was clean the heck out of it, and it was, like I said, it was in the guy's shed, and apparently the shed wasn't a very good shed because it had water. You could tell there was water had gotten on it, and it was dirty, and birds had done their business on it, and it smelled like mice pee and whatever else. So it took me quite a while, but I cleaned it up. As you can see, it's pretty nice visually now. It's not perfect by any means, and it did not work. The problem that he told me was he would turn it on and nothing would happen. Lights and everything would come on and nothing would happen, and then all of a sudden 10 minutes later it'd start playing music. So I thought, that's odd. So started doing some troubleshooting, and sure enough, the protect circuit wasn't pulling in immediately. So did some checks. There was no evidence of DC on the speaker terminal, so that was good. Started checking power supply voltages, found that a lot of them had quite a bit of ripple on them. So I went in there and started testing capacitors on the power supply board, and sure enough, a lot of them were not in good shape at all. So I replaced all of them and plugged it back in, and still you flip it on, and 10 minutes later, finally the protect circuit would kick in. But in the meantime, I was doing some testing on the power supply voltages. They all looked a lot better with no ripple on it, with the new capacitors, so on and so forth. So I started digging around in the protect circuit itself, since I couldn't find any reason for it to not work. And turns out that several of the capacitors on it had gone open or nearly open, and so I kind of felt that the muting circuit, which is kind of timed with some of the capacitors on there, was taking 10 minutes instead of 4 or 5 seconds to drop out and allow the protect relay to actuate. So I replaced all them, and sure enough, within 5 seconds, the protect relay pulled in, and the thing sounded pretty good. So I left it at that, kept it out in the garage for several months, and played it every day when I was working out in the garage, and finally put it in the house. And after about 3 or 4 months, I was listening to a record through the phono input, and then suddenly it almost sounded like a machine gun going off. I ran over, shut the thing off really quick. Well, the phono section needed rebuilt at that point. Many of the transistors had gone leaky, and the capacitors, half of them were starting to actually physically leak liquid on the board. So replaced all that, and phono section sounded great after that. Ran it for a while, and then suddenly the protect circuit started randomly kicking out now. Not necessarily on startup, but after you ran it for a while, it would just click out, click back in. So again, went through the whole process. No evidence at all of any DC on the speaker terminals. All the power supply voltages were really good. So started doing some troubleshooting on the protect circuit itself, and found one transistor. I can't remember which one it is, Q6, Q7, I can't remember exactly now. It was starting to fail, and it would fail intermittently. It was kind of a tough problem to find, and the way I did find it, I knew it had to be something on that board because there was no reason for anything else. So I started out with freeze spray. Nothing happened. You would think that freeze spray, after what did show the fault, you think freeze spray would, but it did not. And I'm measuring voltages, and most of the voltages are there except for one capacitor, one transistor seemed like it had voltage to ground on the output when it really shouldn't have. So I'm thinking this must be maybe getting leaky. So I started messing around. I had it out once and it tested just fine, put it back in. Well, finally I just decided, for the heck of it, I'm just going to start tapping each one of these transistors with my small screwdriver handle. And the moment I tapped that one that I suspected, bang, the protect circuit, the protect relay dropped out, and sure enough, I checked the voltage out of that transistor, and it has 500 millivolts coming out of it with nothing on the base. So pull the thing out, and it checks like a Zener diode on my one, like 2 double Zener diodes. So obviously that's very leaky. But then by the time I moved it to one of my other transistor testers, it tested good again. And then I went back to the original tester that tested as a dual Zener diode, and it tested good again. And it was bad. I went through and actually I replaced all the transistors on the protect circuit. Now the thing works perfectly and has for the past couple weeks. But I just kind of thought that I would go through this whole little process on a few of the problems I found here. And what I plan on doing, I just wanted to show this kind of as an introduction and talk about some of the problems that I ran into. And on the next video, what I plan on doing is or maybe I'll attach to this, it depends on how long it is. I'm going to take that transistor that I know for a fact is bad, and we're going to test that on several different methods that I have for testing, and see if we can find that as a bad transistor. Because right now, at least when I put it in the little bag that I have, it tested as a good transistor again, except for one device that I have that isn't necessarily a very common piece of test equipment anymore, I could actually hear the leakage through it. So I'm going to, when I shut this off, I'm going to set up various different ways that I can test a transistor, and we'll see if we can find a way to show that this transistor is bad. And this is more than anything, this is a little bit of a educational thing to show you that just because something tests good doesn't necessarily mean that it is good. I've run into this before, even with capacitors. You know that particular part of the circuit, that's the only thing left. You replace that capacitor and the thing runs. But yet, any of the methods I had to test it, it showed good. So I just thought I would have a little discussion about that. And I think what I'll do now is I'll pan in on this if I can keep this thing in focus, and I'll just kind of, yeah, it's not going to want to stay in focus. I'll get as close as I can with it. That might be about it. And we'll just kind of slowly go across this thing. As you can see, after my cleaning, it's actually in pretty nice shape. Visually, it's not, like I said, it's not perfect. It was in a shed for, from what I understand, close to 15 years. So it's obviously not going to be perfect, but certainly not bad. And the coworker got this from his uncle, which I had worked with him prior 20-some years ago at the same shop, and he had been in the Navy in the 1970s, and he picked this up at a PX somewhere. I think probably would have been over, maybe over in Europe somewhere, because that's where these were the most, I guess the most commonly available was a military PXs over in Europe. I guess they weren't very common in the States. And ever since I've gotten this thing, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, or whatever the heck it was, I've had like an eBay search up for these, and they very rarely come up, just a few times a year, and every time they sell for a lot of money. So I don't know, I just thought I would show this, and then I'm going to start testing some of these capacitors, testing this transistor, several different methods, and I'll film that and see if we can consistently get it to fail, this intermittent transistor.